Welcome, fellow history enthusiasts, to rambling passion and a captivating tour through some of the illustrious past housed within Dayton, Nevada's museum. Today, in part one of our enthralling two-part video series, we'll delve into some of the rich history of one of Nevada's first settlements. If you like today's video, don't miss part two. You know what to do.
Here today to record some of Dayton, Nevada's historical information and try to make a decent YouTube video for you all to appreciate and enjoy. Thank you for watching.
My name's Stoney Tennant, and I am part of the group who originally started the museum here in Dayton. We are open on weekends during the winter and most days during the summer, especially special occasions. And I've been in Dayton since 1964, so we're going to do a pretty good tour today.
Awesome. So we look forward to seeing everything and hearing the history of the town and what you have to say.
All right.
So we look forward to it.
Starting with this building. This is the original schoolhouse, built in 1865. It's built out of local stone and built by the community in those days. They built their own places, their own schools. And so it's been here for a number of years and survived the fires in Dayton. Fortunately, it was a little bit separated from town, so it survived, and a stone building, and it did survive, one of the few buildings that did, a couple of the main fires, and we'll talk about that later. But this became the community center back in the late 1960s, and they shut the school down in 1959 because it didn't have any running water and it didn't have any restrooms, still had the outhouse and no sanitation facilities. So they shut the school down and transferred everybody up to the what was used to be the courthouse, and then the high school up there, and they transferred the grammar school up there. So we got the building shortly after that for our museum, and we were happy to have one of the oldest buildings in town. It's the oldest building in its original spot. Glenbrook School in Reno got moved and saved, and it's 6 months older than we are. So we can't claim the oldest, but at least the oldest in the same spot.
In the same spot. Well, that's unusual.
Yeah.
Usually everybody wants to move everything.
This was difficult.
Head in.
Okay, we'll go on in.
I'd like to tell the history of the Dayton Museum, just a schoolhouse here in 1865, and then it closed in 1959. The history of that is really interesting because by then our kids were still going to this schoolhouse. It was an elementary school, and there were no plumbing in here. The kids were still with the outhouses, believe it or not.
And you have some of those outside, I see.
Yeah, we moved some of those in. Yeah.
Okay. No, unfortunately, that one didn't survive, but we brought those from other homes.
Close enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are really old. Those are pioneer outhouses. The outhouses of Dayton are very interesting too. But anyway, our museum got started then because a lot of new people moved in from California, and they decided that maybe Old Town Dayton should do something with it. They didn't like it. So my friend and I, and her name was Gail Miner, and she was a native Nevadan like I am. And so we decided, no, 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 this is not going to happen. So we thought, well, let's do a museum. Well, where in the heck are we going to do a museum? The old firehouse and jail doesn't have any electricity. Well, by then this was um,
Community
senior
center.
center, senior center, very busy. Well, then they got a new center out east of town. So interesting how simple it was to get this building from the county then. They did not have a general, like a manager. So it was just a kind of a county engineer that handled things. And I remember standing on the front porch saying to him when they were all moving out, and I said, can we have this for a museum? He said, sure. So it was that simple, but it wasn't simple for us. This whole building, they left a mess. And it was pipes coming out of the kitchen in there, up and down, gas. Everything was just left. And so we just tackled 5 or 6 of us, just tackled it and got in here and started cleaning. And then this was gone here. This was later to add some more.
Right.
This was a one-room schoolhouse, right? So anyway, one of the great stories is my husband and my son decided they would get down to this floor, right? So they started in
carpet.
He could probably tell you about it. Looked like carpet, right? So then they started stripping, and pretty soon it was old linoleum, and pretty soon it was tar stuck on the floor.
They had adhered the linoleum to this original wood floor, the hot mop tar, and then rolled the linoleum out. And so this floor, I pulled the linoleum up and here, tar. I couldn't believe it.
So how'd you get the tar off of the wood?
We first started trying to scrape it. And then we tried wood power planing, but it just gummed everything up. So I have some property I rent out to a roofing company up at Mound House, and he had a machine that removes tar from these roofs, and it's circulating, has teeth this way, and it rotates, and it rips up the tar without clogging up the teeth. And so they brought it in here and removed. You can see some of the swirls in areas there.
So it made it much faster than doing it with a putty knife and by hand and on your knees.
Yeah. We'd retired here.
We were going to open that year. It was for Dayton Valley Days. That was 1993. But when you open the door and see all black tar, that wouldn't have been. And people stuck to the floor.
You get that weird suction noise.
That's right.
Take a piece of history with you on your shoe.
So anyway, we waited for a year and then we opened it up.
Nice.
And we just had a dream. We had no money. We had never done a museum, anything. We just started saving artifacts, and they started pouring in. Dayton was an Italian town for years, turn of the century, all Italian, and they had saved so much stuff too, and those families. And then there was a lady in Reno that her family was pioneers here, and she had been her brothers and father and grandfather came here in 1860s and had a blacksmith shop. And then they had a big ranch out for the golf courses.
Okay.
And so this woman that we met, she was 93 in Reno. She was married well. I was writing articles in the newspaper on art history and everything. She read one. She invited us in. I knew a lot of the pioneer people here, still living. So the three of us, they took me in with them to a place in Rio. And in the basement was all Dayton's history. So she had saved everything, and then later she shipped everything to us in a U-Haul.
Wow.
I mean, how can you beat that?
Yeah, we'll see more of it as we go through here.
Yeah, right.
The Randall family, they were generational sheriffs. First the grandfather, and then the father, and kind of passed on down. But they owned a big ranch out on the other side of the valley here. They raised hot-blooded horses, race horses, and they made a ton of money with their race horses. And so they were quite wealthy family, relative to the rest
For
of
the
the
day,
area.
yeah.
So everything in this building is Dayton stuff. We don't take antiques.
Right.
We take things that have a story. So everything in here has a story. And the reason people like our museum so much is because almost everywhere you go, there is a reason for the town. I mean, every place there's a reason for the town, but there is one reason for a town. It's a lumber town, it's an agricultural town, it's a railroad town, it's something that developed that town. Well, we had the Chinese who came to dig a main ditch down here, and then they just dumped the Chinese when they were finished with the ditch, and then Dayton, first name of Dayton was Chinatown. But we have the railroad, the Carson and Colorado Railroad here. We have the mills and the mining that went on because of the gold. The pine nuts were a main source of energy because they cut all of the pine nut trees up there, and they were shipped as firewood or charcoal to Virginia City and all of the development. But the mills used steam engines for power, used tons of cordwood, and at one time the woodlots here in town had 128 wagon loads a day coming out of the pine nuts and into the woodlots here, and then it was distributed to all of the mills. And there were how many mills on the river here?
Oh, maybe 20 some odd. And
Yeah,
then-
Quite
20.
a few mills.
Yeah,
And then they continued
the
all
whole,
the way down to Carson City. Yeah.
yeah, not down,
Well, to Empire,
down from
almost
Darn,
to Carson.
but each one of them in turn took the water out of the river, ran it over either an underslung or overslung water wheel, and used that energy. And so because we had the river, we had agriculture. All of the land across the other side of the river here was all under row crops, potatoes and row crops, raising food and alfalfa for animals. So we were an agricultural town, a wood cutting town, all of these things
quite,
that we
quite
had.
the hub
Yeah.
of everything. That's
So
incredible.
in our museum represents that. You see the railroad stuff here and the Chinese stuff in the back of the museum, and every artifact in here. You see down here the sign that says Randall.
Oh, I see that. Yeah.
That's from the railroad siding for the Randall Ranch out. That one's really hard to see. We have another one, but everything in here has a story. And that's what I'm trying to do with the docents in here. And there's so much information. It's taken me 60 years to acquire, but there's so much information about the history of things in this museum, what they were used for, how they were used, how much people made using them, all of this information that we have and we're trying to pass on to our docents. And I love giving tours of people who are interested because I want to disseminate all of that stuff I have in my head.
How do you sleep at night with all that information? That's a
It's
lot
getting
of
harder and harder to acquire new stuff. You notice I don't do the internet.
That's some incredible thing. And what's funny is growing up, at my age, we grew up on Westerns. When you start visiting these towns, Austin, Nevada, Virginia City, Dayton, it ain't nothing like the Westerns you've seen on the movie.
No.
They didn't have the cowboys and
No.
there was none of that. I understand Virginia City didn't allow cowboys to really stay very long. They could pass through,
Right.
but that wasn't even a very nice visit for them.
Yeah.
It was moms, dads, kids, and
Right.
so they kind of.
Yeah,
I mean,
they
it had
were
its share of
too
problems.
unruly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they had their share of problems, but yeah, the cowboy was not the person that actually went up there like everybody thinks in the movies on
Right.
Bonanza. That's
And another thing that is, when you read these old journals, you find all of this bits of information that they didn't intend to put in there. But that's another thing. People think that everybody had a horse and buggy, and it was really expensive hay during the heyday of Virginia City. was $200 to $210 a ton. And when people were a teamster, made $1.25 to $2.50 a day. 12-hour days in those days, not 8 hours like now. So they worked 12 hours to make $2.50 a day. So $200 worth of alfalfa a ton.
A lot.
I mean, they were outrageous.
So what is
they
a
couldn't
teamster?
afford it. But my point is, they walked everywhere. They walked from here to Como, the top of the mountain over here. They walked from here to Virginia City on a daily basis. People lived here in town, walked to Silver City to work in the mills up there. They walked up the canyon. And walking was, long distance was an everyday thing. We don't do any of that anymore.
No.
We don't even know where they did it.
So what is a teamster? Is that a miner?
Oh no, teamster is a wagon.
Oh, gotcha.
A commercial wagon driver, whether they're hauling ore or wood or whatever. But the driver was called a teamster.
And my understanding is, if you were a miner, you were probably pretty well paid for that time period as a miner.
Mining at the Comstock was a very dangerous job. Lots of people got killed for all kinds of reasons there. So they were making $3 to $3.50 a day, and they could live in the boarding house, which was room and board, for $1.50 a day. So they could put $1.50 a day away, or more, $2 a day away or more, and they could save up for buying land, which you could go out here and buy a ranch for $200.
So they were the top paid people of the day, basically.
Exactly.
I mean,
yeah.
But for the work they did, that's never knew if you were coming out from underground or not.
Yeah, carpenters. They had employed as many carpenters as they employed actual pick and shovel miners.
Wow.
Because of square set timbers underneath there. And timbering had to be constantly redone because the pressures, you're shifting, and the water pressure and everything on it. So, and they used wood because wood, you could see the strain on it. It sagged, and you knew that big 12 by 12 timber was about ready to go. You could tell by looking at it. So it had to be replaced. And if you used anything rigid, like a steel timber or something, there was so much pressure and it would suddenly collapse and you didn't know.
Yeah. Wow.
So
I think I would like to add that we do have photographs, a lot of photographs, and I think if you get the tour going, then it'll tell.
Okay, let's go ahead and we'll do the little walk around. And,
right.
So.
Okay, we have tons of firsts here in Dayton, and Laura could go through the whole list of firsts: the first marriage, the first divorce, the first legal hanging, all of these things. Another of our firsts is in 1857, they needed water back in the canyon. This is before Virginia City was discovered. It took them 10 years from the 1849 discovery of gold at the bottom of the canyon to the discovery of Virginia City, because geology, they didn't know that much about it in those days. And so they didn't think about the fact that there's gold here, but where did it come from?
Right.
And that hard rock, they didn't even understand hard rock mining. Most of the people didn't even understand mining. And they liked to have a Mexican as part of their partnership when they had a good claim, because the Mexicans in California had, people think that the gold discovery at Sutter's Fort was a big eye-opening discovery. Hey, there's gold here. The Spanish knew there was gold there
long before
200 years. And the Mexicans, under the Spanish control, the Mexican people in California operated gold mines in a lot of areas. And they understood placer and hard rock mining. And so the locals, guys, if they had, that's why there's Mexican Dam, there's El Dorado Canyon. We have these Spanish names here is because these guys brought in the Mexicans and employed them.
Interesting.
However, I've gotten way off point. They in 1857 they dug a 3.5 mile ditch that goes up and around and goes back into the canyon and provides river water back up in that canyon because they needed to wash their sand. The way the miners mined here was that they dug the rock and the sand and the dirt out, and they screened everything, stacked all of the rock, and stockpiled the sand because they washed the sand to get the gold out. But they didn't have water in this Gold Canyon, very little water. The upper guys used it all up. What little was coming down to the lower people. They didn't have water except in the winter when there was storms or something and the creek was running to wash their stuff. So they had to pack all of that sand down to the river and wash it. And so the first commercial endeavor was to dig that 3.5 mile ditch that came in to provide water back up in the canyon. And the people who did it employed the Chinese, and the way they did it was they took a hose that had a glass vial on each end, and they filled that hose with water, and the mark on the vial, as you string that hose out, you raise or lower you set a mark on one end and you raise or lower the vial on the other side. You can tell it when it's exactly level, or if you lower it, you can see how much lower you are, and that's how they staked the flow of this of the ditch. They worked backward. They started where they wanted the reservoir, and then they worked backward with just a little rise all the way through the whole thing. And they got clear back into the canyon 3.5 miles away before they finally got to where they could put a dam in to get water to the point where they wanted it. But somebody staked it wrong and got the flow in one section on the side of the hill up here. You can see where they started digging the ditch. And what they would do is they would just scratch a little trough, and then they would run some water in there and let the water soak down and loosen the soil. And then they would dig down to the depth that it was loosened, and then they kept putting water in there and kept digging the ditch deeper and deeper and wider until they got it to the dimensions they wanted. But first they scratched that little trough. You can see the little trough going the wrong direction as it's coming down the hill up there. But anyway, they dropped all of the Chinese off after the ditch was dug, and they moved in and lived in these shanty towns. And this was the first actual town of Dayton was Chinatown, and that's what it was known by.
I just wanted to add, can I add a little bit to
you
this?
can.
This was in 1858, 59. Captain J.H. Simpson came through here with the federal government, and they were looking for a shorter route instead of the Truckee River route.
Right.
They were looking for a shorter route, so they were looking for the Carson route.
Which is Highway 50 now.
Yeah.
Simpson
So
established.
okay.
And so then this was where we have the old maps of Chinatown. Yeah. And then I just want to say, as far as the museum, this is one of this man's crossings down the river. And it was illustrated. It was an awesome book, and we have an old 100-year-old copy. He was eventually killed by Indians, but all of his work was saved. And so we also have the pioneers who saved all these photographs for us. We didn't tell them to, of course, but they saved all the photographs, and they were very close. But Dayton was neat because they really did like the Chinese, so work together. So that's why we have such a great Chinese collection. This is probably the oldest garment in the state of Nevada. This was found next door, and a place next door had a rocked-in area. And in the bottom, one of the renters came over with this for us. And so naturally, my friend threw it in the washing machine because it was dirty. And I said, "You did what?" So anyway, we decided we'd keep it. But if you were to look closely at it, you will see how it was made, tiny little stitches, grass curtains.
Hand sewn.
Yeah, just amazing. Uh,
Actually, what it was is all of the wells in town, when the dredged at the mouth of the canyon behind it, that cut off the aquifer. The water came down that creek and then ran underground to the river. And when they dug that hole for the dredge, it cut off the aquifer. And people had hand dug wells inside their houses, which at their kitchen sink, they would have a hand pump, and the well would be straight down below their sink. And so after they cut off the water, this well was completely dry, and people threw trash into these wells and fill them back up like they did outhouses, bottles and stuff. And that was part of the trash that was thrown in the dry well. So it survived down there because of the dry, and it remained dry, never got wet because the water was cut off.
So this was interesting that this was Old Holly, and he was here for a long time, and he would walk to Virginia City. He would even, and I don't know if he ever did, but some of them carried these. They sold the water for like 25 cents. They would haul the water to Virginia City and sell it. He always had shrimp and things that he got here, and he sold here to the people. So he was very revered in this town, and so that's his picture also. This man, Garfield, he worked in the wood camp. He wanted to be more American, the pioneer people told me. So this was his place where he lived, and you can see how he's dressing. And then this was the merchant here. And then she came into play. It's kind of interesting because that she came into play. There were no Chinese women here, so uh, we only have this information because our pioneers wrote it on the back of photographs. And so look at this quality of photographs then of the cameras, that they could be enlarged like this. So anyway, as the story goes, we all know there was an anti-Chinese movement, and here this was in 1889, and the miners didn't like the Chinese because they were cheaply. But however, this group of people had their own culture, and when he owed a debt to this merchant, he gave her his granddaughter.
Fat Sam owned the local Chinese store. He imported these Chinese articles and provided it for the community. And so Fat Sam was, or Holly was indebted to Fat Sam for something, but it was enough that Holly traded his granddaughter to Fat Sam to pay the bill off at the store. So Fat Sam ended up with this young girl.
They don't know. We don't know if she was sent back to China or what. But
we don't know what happened to her.
We don't know what happened to her.
No history.
But I think sometimes these are the cultures that we didn't understand.
Right.
So that's what I think is really important about everything. Also, when Captain Simpson was here, he went into the opium dens as well, and he talked all about that. I mean, we have amazing written history too. I got it going.
As I said, we have a story for everything. These are artifacts that I picked up back in Gold Canyon, and I had no idea what they were. They were something to do with mining. And then we saw this old drawing, an ink drawing that was in the newspaper in Sacramento about, I think this was around 1850 or 51, that this drawing appeared in the newspaper, and it had this is exactly the screen on the top of that.
Shaker screen then.
Yeah, that's a cradle.
Right.
Yeah. They dump the water in up there and wash that out, and so here he's dipping the water there with. This was a little longer dipper than that one, but so as I said, everything has a story. the wood cutting in the pine nuts was very difficult because they couldn't get roads up in once it got really rocky and steep, and that's all volcanic material and very steep and rocky area, and where they were cutting the pine trees. But horses couldn't get around up in there because they couldn't stand up. Slick shod horses couldn't stand up. And so what they did was they took the roads up into the mouths of the canyons as far as they could go, and then they had to get an area where they had a turnaround, and they would put a raised area there where they could pull the wagon up, and they yarded all of that cordwood, and then they loaded it on wagons and brought them into Dayton to the wood lots. But it used to be that a lot of these oxen shoes were all over up in the pine nuts. You'd find them. I have a sled over there on the other side, but the way they did was the oxen would drag a sled out empty out to a certain area, and the cutter he cut and stacked his wood on there, and then he got paid for what. That's how they paid them. They didn't pay them by the day. They paid them by the cord. Yeah. So they cut it, stacked it on this sled, and then the oxen came and took the sled back to the yarding area and dropped off, and then it was loaded on wagons and brought down. But oxen shoe and oxen equipment, chains and stuff, that the yokes for the oxen, we used to find a lot up there in the pine nuts. And when I first came here, that was what I was really interested in. You know how everything becomes garbage before it becomes collectible? Right. Well, when I came to Dayton, everything was garbage. I mean, lots of things were garbage. They were thrown out behind the barns. And all of this old stuff that was out there, wood rotting and beside, and I was really interested in the history, so I collected it up. I had a whole barn full of stuff. And so this is all stuff that I've collected and brought in here for the museum. And so it's all different up there now in the pine nuts. You can't find anything. People have been everywhere. People raised chickens. They paid off. We have a ledger from Dr. Hazlitt's, and we'll see his house down there, from 1870. And people paid off their debt to the doctor in eggs or chickens or meat.
That's true.
And
there was a barter.
Yeah.
More than a cash flow, it was a barter system.
Right. And then he resold it at a profit. But they sold eggs by the weight. You know, now they're size, small, right, medium, and large, but you sold eggs dozen by the weight. And so commodities were all, these are all scales that different types of commodities were weighed on. The stores used larger scales, and of course the pharmacist used balance scales. We have those separately, real sensitive scales. And of course the old telephones from around town that we collected up. And we were a Pony Express stop, and we'll see the Pony Express wall downtown. And so being part of the Pony Express, we have an exhibit here. The Lincoln Highway went right through the middle of town. Lincoln Highway, which is now 50, was just a trail until Eisenhower, when he was a young lieutenant colonel, was put in charge of establishing a route that went seacoast to seacoast, and the Lincoln Highway was what Eisenhower put in long before he was president.
It's still the loneliest highway.
Yeah, yeah. So these are all part of the Randall family stuff. Dixie Lehman Randall saved all of these things, shoes from her grandmother.
Now they use a tool, if I remember right, to do the buttons and
The button
shoelaces?
hook, yeah,
Button hook, yeah.
button hooks. We have button hooks someplace. I don't know where. A lot of this stuff that came in, we have no idea why it was there, like wooden shoes. We don't know, what the connection of the Randall family to Holland or any of that. Unfortunately, Dixie died before we got all of the information. She sent all of this stuff over, and we wanted to get her here to explain things, but we missed some.
Let me run to the restroom real quick.
Yeah, right back in, right down the hall and to your left, or on this end of the hall, actually. Anyway, this is a little display about the sheep and cattle industry here in the local area. And this OC brand down here was the first brand registered in Nevada. We have more oxen shoes and different things from the ranches here. These saddles are, I'm going to start on the other end.
Okay.
This saddle was in terrible shape, and it took me 3 months to get it back into this condition. But when I cleaned it up, I saw in the back here where the saddle maker generally stamps his name and where it's from. I saw that it was made by an outfit in Lakeview, Oregon. So Laura looked it up and found an old advertisement for this saddle, and this saddle maker in Lakeview, Oregon sold this saddle for $40 in 1890, and they advertised $40 shipped anywhere. $40 is a lot of money because somebody doing ranch work, or of course you work for the ranch for pound as well. Pound is room and board, and you work for somewhere around $2 to $3 a week in pound, and so $40, $2 a week, even if you saved all of your stuff. Took me a long time to buy one of these saddles, but this is what we call slick fork, high candle, center fire saddle. And center fire means you only have 1 cinch, and it's in the middle. New saddles have 2 cinches, and the stirrups are set forward. And it's much easier to ride because when you have your stirrups in the center of the saddle, you have to stay in the center of the saddle, or you're being thrown against the cantle or the pommel, and you have to be a lot better rider to ride a center fire saddle. The guy who made this died in 1903, so the advertisement was 1890, and he died in 1903, but he retired in 1900. So we know it was made sometime during the 1880s. And this is a rawhide rope, and the horn is, you can see it's a different type of horn than a modern saddle. Modern saddle is wrapped and heavy. That is because with the modern ropes are strong enough that when a calf or a steer or a cow hits the end of that rope, it slams and it stops the animal. Well, when you're with a reata, and we call this rawhide rope. With a rawhide rope, you have to play it out like a fish. You have to take a dally on here that slips, and you have to slow them down and stop them slowly. And so you have a real long rope that is not as heavy. This is a calf rope, it's lightweight. Some are heavier than that, but you have to be a very good roper. They don't hold a loop like a modern rope, and you had to play the cattle or you broke your rope, and that was a lot of money's worth of
But you had
Right.
work, but you had business then.
yeah. So we have, and the cowboys in the old days during winter was slow period, and they would make stuff like this horsehair cinch, all handmade and twisted out of horsehair. And they use the hair from the mane because it's finer than the tail, and so they twisted all that up and made this cowboy gear all winter. Yeah, go ahead. And then the rest of these saddles are the transition. 1890, we have the slick fork. There are no swells on the saddle. The cantle was still high, but not as high. But you had swells on the side so that you could hang on with your knees, clench your knees and hang on better. And the stirrups are moved farther forward. And so this saddle is right at the turn of the century when they started putting swells on it. And these are goat hide woolly shafts, they call them, but they're made out of goat hide and from the same period. This is from 1880s, that one. So, and then this saddle, a little later, and they have put bigger swells on here, and whoever rode this wore out the leather, and they put rawhide over the top of it and extended it, made more. Somebody modified that saddle, and this was a newer, more modern saddle. Still got pretty high cantle, but it's getting smaller and smaller like the modern saddles. And this is a child's saddle, but you get now to the modern type of swells and everything more modern look.
All working saddles, no pleasure riding.
Yeah, all work, yeah. And then we get into our schools, and we have so many pictures of this school. We can't put them all out, but we have what this museum looked like in its original form, and then they added the entry on the front. They added that about 1906, I think.
Now, was
1905.
that to help with snow here, or just
It became the cloakroom.
kind of a
Yeah. When kids came, they hung their the sides. We go out there and look at it. Have the closet doors, and they hung all their clothes in there. And there were two pot-bellied stoves. You can see where one stove was in there and one over on the other side. They had the pot-bellied stove, and they had a sheet metal. We still have all of this stuff out there, so I speak with authority. They had a sheet metal wooden thing with sheet metal over the top of it, and then around the stove they had like cast iron pipe put out so that for two reasons. You could hang wet stuff on there, and you kept people from falling into the stove and getting burned. And so there was this barrier out around and the floor protected with the sheet metal. Burning coal. They mine coal in the canyon back here, by the way. So we had a coal mine too.
Oh wow! I never even heard about it. So yeah, that's
Yeah, it was not great coal. It had a lot of peat and garbage in it, so it was dirty coal.
right.
But they burned it here for free, so they kept it. This is the sled I mentioned that they pulled around with the oxen, and this has been through the fire up there. I didn't find all of it. I mean, it was partially burned, and this is just to commemorate our Mexican influence.
The Mexican saddle for roping.
Big, yeah, yep, yep. Yeah, and this is different. We have the photo down here of hands and, oh, no. Yeah, that's it, right there, hands and, that's this. Those guys were small. I didn't realize how small so many people were until you see them in a doorway or something like this. You have this cutting block and chopping block, and they say, of course, the way this photograph is set up, them being behind, but I'm still always amazed how small most people were in those days.
Yeah, did you go into homes or businesses from that time period and the stores are
Yeah, 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 yeah. Out at Broken Hills, a ghost town out the other side of Gabbs, we had some mining claims out there. A partner and I had them, and in the town of Broken Hills, there was a house that the guy built, obviously just for himself, because the doorways were all about this high. All of the windows were down, but it was a house. It wasn't a dollhouse or anything. It was a regular house with regular windows and doors, but everything was small. He must have been tiny.
so yeah, they can probably 5 foot.
Yeah, yeah, right. Now my grandfather was 5'6", and I talked to him, and he said, yeah, when I was in school, I was just about as tall as anybody in the school. So each generation, I guess. I know the younger generation, I go to high schools now, I'm looking up at these guys. Just more, this is part of our mining exhibit. We have tools and things used in the mines. That auger back there is part of the timbering process where they mortise and tenon, and then they drilled through and put a dowel to lock it. And so that was what they did. And people look at these old tools and don't know what they are, like this. That's a pipe wrench. You clamp the pipe in there to hold it, and this was adjustable. That's a real unique situation, but somebody put a lot of force on that that one to hold the pipe. The rest of these are blacksmithing tools, different applications for hammerheads and sharpening picks and everything. You had a different tool, of course, for doing different operations.
What are the metal balls? What are those?
Those are for a ball mill for reducing ore after you run it through the jaw crusher, and the jaw crusher will take it down to gravel size. But then it went through just a big long cylinder that was about 20 to 40 feet long, and it was on a very, very gradual fall in there. And you put the gravel in one end, and then this thing rotated, and those balls in there just beat the.
Just another type of crusher.
Yeah, and it came out powder on the other end. And you could adjust the fineness by adjusting the fall.
It took to.
Yeah, if it stayed in there longer for finer. And that's what the assayer's job was. He assayed the ore to decide at the mill itself. Every mill had an assayer, and every mine had an assayer. And the reason for that was the mine wanted to know what the ore was worth before they sent it to the mill. And so that for two reasons: were they being ripped off, or somebody taking their skimming, or number two, was the recovery of that mill as good as the next mill down the road? And so the mine had an assayer, then it went to the mill, and the mill assayed it. And gold in this country is all fine. There are very few nuggets. And so the degree of how fine it is, determined how much you had to crush the ore. Of course, if you had to crush it more, it was more expensive. If you could crush it less and get the same amount of recovery, So that was the job of the assayer, one of his jobs, tell the value and to tell the mill, okay, what is the optimum crush size? And the mills had screens that they put in, the stamp mill and all of that had a screen, and the water washed the stuff through, and they changed the screen to adjust for how fine they had to crush it. And so anyway, it's a very complicated process that people don't understand these
Yeah,
days.
I never knew that. I always figured it was a stamp mill, and that was, you know, that was it. Never
Yeah.
realized. Oh,
Yeah.
you got quite the collection of bottles.
Yeah, these are all of the in barns. Outhouses weren't. I mean, the toilet wasn't always in the outhouse. Sometimes it was in a little side of the barn because the weather was bad. You didn't want to run.
You won't have to go too far.
More protection. Yeah. So when we moved barns and stuff, we would find these outhouses that have been filled in inside the barn, and that's where those bottles came from.
Did people actually, I've heard stories, I don't know if it's true, did people actually hide some of their valuables in outhouses?
Yes, they did. And I have found rings, gold rings. My wife wears a gold ring that has white quartz with wire gold all through it.
Oh,
and it was hidden in an outhouse.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I have some outhouse trivia I will tell you on the way out, because people they don't know much about outhouses.
Yeah, it was like a safe. Nobody wanted to dig in there. So.
Yeah. Well, there were rules about outhouses that we don't have in our bathrooms these days, and so I'll tell you some of the rules. We have things like this. This is kind of stuff that I picked up outside barns that people were throwing away. And of course, nobody has any idea what this is.
It looks like some type of trap.
It is. You set.
Oh, yeah.
Whoops. What happened? Oh, I broke the hinge.
Yeah, the spring.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, you set this over here, and the gopher comes through and trips this thing.
It looks like it had two trip lines, double.
Yeah, well, this one went over here, and then this one went across this way. Yeah.
Okay.
And then this one went. How did that? Oh, okay. This came up here.
There it is.
Then as the gopher went up, it had to get past here before it tripped it, and then it would push that. The gopher would trip that, and then this would come over and impale him in the tunnel.
I remember my grandmother had almost looked like a mouse trap that we look at today, like for the bigger rats and stuff.
Yes,
but it was all metal, but it was a gopher trap. No, I take that back. I am incorrect. It looked like a dang bear trap. You actually had to squeeze
yeah,
and set it, and then you'd stick it down in the gopher hole at the edge of it.
Oh.
And when he'd pop his head up, yeah, it was
different type.
Yeah, different time.
Yeah, this went in the tunnel. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember getting hold of one of those, and my grandmother had a fit.
Yeah, you're gonna get hurt badly by it. Yeah, and different types of hand steels down there for drilling in the tunnel. Things like tools had to be cut down to work underground. You can't swing a sledgehammer underground, so you have short-handled hammers, and so we identify all of these different types of tools. Things like this is called a spoon. When you're hand drilling, of course, there was no way to clean the hole out, so you stuck this spoon in there and rotated it and got it full of the filings and kept your hole clean with these. They're just made locally by the blacksmiths.
That alone was an all-day job.
Yeah. Yeah, I do a lot of blacksmithing myself because I make for people wagon parts and stuff that are broken, and so I repair them and make new ones that are forge welded and everything like the originals.
Now, have you been up to the Sutro Tunnel? Have you been up?
Oh yeah.
I guess I don't know. Maybe you did it or some, but they've got an old planer they found and parts were broken. So the guy that redid it had to make a lot of those parts. So I don't, was that you?
No,
that,
it wasn't me. No.
Yeah, I guess made some of the gears.
Oh.
I mean, they look like gears, like tapered.
Yeah.
So I guess they've still got a couple gears that are broke that he's in the process of redoing.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
It's quite interesting. Yeah.
In 1964, when I moved here, that was why I moved here. I went in a partnership with a guy, and we opened a bar out there at Sutro, and we left it all original stuff. Behind the bar, it was a warehouse, and it had shelves like this, but all divided up, and we had everything in there that we found around there. Petrified cats, I mean mummified, not petrified, mummified cats and bottles and all this stuff back behind the bar. And then no electricity in there. Everything was all oil lamps and all. People came from Reno all over the place, and Highway 50 was so seldom traveled that we would sit outside on the deck, and if we saw lights of the cars leaving Dayton headed north, it was a 50-50 chance that they were coming to the bar or going straight ahead. And that has certainly changed over time. Just at night, nobody was on the highway in those days. Yeah, and these are old buckets with a windlass to hoist the materials to the surface. That's Dr. Hazlitt's apothecary stuff.
So was that his bag down there as well? Would that have been his?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we have our churches, mostly about this. We tried to save this church. The county, the kids around here had a band back in the 60s, and they played music, Western music, and had dances in that church. And the county, it was on county property, and I guess a foreclosure for taxes. And the county, you can see it's leaning, and the county was worried that that building was going to fall in. And there's the picture of them. The county brought in a bulldozer and leveled the thing before the town people could complain. And so we went up there and saved the cross and some windows. That's all we have left of it.
And where was this located?
This was located down on Pike Street, just back. Well, I take that back. It was this way. The rodeo grounds used to be right next door for the and the church was right next to the rodeo grounds up there. And these are all arrowheads and artifacts that I've collected in the pine nuts over the years. There are some things in here that, like that cradle board. That was a woman here in town when she grew up. The Indian lady, local Indian lady, gave her that, and that was, she had her doll in that. That was part of a toy. But the rest of these things are artifacts that, that's a pine nut hook that I found hanging in a tree up there where they pulled the nuts off of the trees.
Somebody left their tool behind.
Yeah, they always left their tool behind. And that's why you find most of these metates and artifacts are broken. And the reason they're broken is because the Indians were very superstitious. They were nomadic, of course, and they didn't pack these things around, so they left these in areas where they came back every year. And then each generation came back to the family places for processing pine nuts and different seeds. And so when somebody died, normally they would have a wickie up kind of brush cover or some kind of shelter when somebody died, they left them in there, and they sometimes buried them, sometimes just left them in there, burned the thing to the ground, broke all of the stuff that belonged or that person was using, because they believed in the spirits would return,
Right.
and they didn't want the spirits coming back when they were there, coming back looking for these artifacts. So they killed the stones, what they called it, and they broke those artifacts and left them behind, and so that's why all of these things are it's kind of unique to find these kinds of things anymore that aren't broken. This was a skull that I found. If you look right up in the arrowhead and the top of the skull, yeah, that is a female, and she was shot right in the...
So would that have been a white?
No, she's Indian.
She's Indian. So
Yeah.
why they did that?
No, this is a contact zone here, and the Washoe are living along the Sierra and the valleys at the base of the Sierra, and then this was Paiute country, and the north was Shoshone. But pine nuts takes 2 years for a pine nut to develop. The first year is a cone, but the nut isn't developed, and you have to wait till the end of the second year. So these people would all go out, and they would, and pine nuts, if you notice, trees will be absolutely barren. And then some years you just have a ton of pine nuts, cones on it. And there are groves of trees that have lots of cones, groves that are completely barren. So they would send young people up into the mountains to find where are the cones going to be next year, or where the cones are this year, but next year the nuts will be there. Well, the Shoshone were looking for it, the Paiute were looking for it, and the Washoe were looking for it, because that was their winter survival.
Right.
Okay. They needed the pine nuts. But often there would be a conflict over one grove, and there are documented incidents where whites have come in and found where there was the conflict between the two people,
Yeah.
and they had broken, you know how if you break a limb off and it'll leave a spike out on it? They had taken babies and impaled them on it, broken these things off and impaled them on that thing as a warning. Do not come back. This will be your fate. Yeah. And they left the bodies there of the adults and the babies impaled on the tree.
Wow.
And I mean, it was brutal, but that was survival. They needed it. So, those are the things you never read about in the history books. Yeah. Yeah, so I did this. I twisted up. This is made out of sagebrush, like the Indians would do. And that white part down there is stinging nettle. Stinging nettle. And they would take a limb in a mortar like this. If you had a big pestle like that and you're crushing something, you're picking that up and down, up and down. They would take a limb and tie this to the limb so that they had the spring of the limb, or sometimes just put a rope between two trees and then tie this in the middle, and the rope gave the spring. But that's how they were used. You see these in a lot of the museums around out in the lake area. And I don't know what they crushed in this, but that's the only place around these lake beds you find that these mortars and these big pestles. But nobody shows how they were used, and most museums don't even know why. It has a neck, neck chipped in around there where, So you'll see that. Yeah. And these are different things. I have a whole bunch of these. These were a cache. This is from the Tosawee deposit out in up by Denio. But the Tosawee deposit, they called the Indians out there the White Knives because they took those are preforms. Those aren't finished knives, but they would trade those for different things, for seashells that we have here, that kind of thing. So there was this trade work going on, trade it for obsidian, trade it for whatever. But there was a cache up there of these. Okay, here we have a photograph and a model of what is locally a very famous outhouse. And it was the two-story outhouse. The second story of the hotel came out to the outhouse above, and then it had the outhouse below. Whoever built this, I don't know who did it, didn't know exactly how a two-story outhouse worked. And he put the seats of the outhouse against the back wall, just like the upper level was. But of course, it can't work that way. There was a wall in there, and it had sheet metal in it on the back side, so that everything from the upper side went down into a huge hole. One of the ranches out here, the ranches got bought up in the 40s and the 50s by wealthy people from Southern California, mostly the movie industry. And this guy who was a producer bought one of the ranches out here. The local sheriff got very friendly with him, and he thought that Dayton was the armpit of America, and that it was a very hokey town, and to have a two-story outhouse. So Chester, in the middle of the night, had a truck. Chester loaded this outhouse on his truck, and the guy lived in Beverly Hills in a big mansion. And he hauled the two-story outhouse down, and in the middle of the night went in, unloaded the truck on this guy's front yard, and when he woke up in the morning, he had a two-story outhouse in his front yard. So we don't know what happened to it after that. But anyway, we no longer have the two-story outhouse. This is a pie hutch. Everybody had a pie hutch, perforated with designs, homemade, and they put pies and stuff in here to cool. They used it as a bread locker and that kind of thing to keep the flies and critters out. And photographs of Old Town, all of the different operations around here. This is driving piles for the railroad crossing of the river. This kinds of things. This is a picture of the old depot. Yep. Yeah. So this is to honor our local vets. These are the things that, except this one. During the Second World War, everybody was very patriotic. I grew up during the Second World War, and I remember all of the patriotism here, and I pine for those days. But this was mine. My mother made a Marine Corps, Army, and Navy uniform, and I wasn't the only kid. We wore the uniforms of the military, and the women in every family was proud of their military relatives who served. This guy, the Army guy right there, he went to school here. We have a lot of documents, letters and things that he wrote, but he died in D-Day. He was in the first wave that landed, and he was a lieutenant killed there. So that's to honor our vets, and more stuff. Here's more children's things. These aren't mine. These are other people's. And dresses from the 1890s and 80s. And things from this is Randall again, from the Randall Ranch. This chair behind you is the Druids. This is the Grand Poopah of the Druids. We had a Druid hall here in town. The Odeon used to be oh, crying out loud, getting old is terrible. The ones all the time you see now, the Order of Oddfellows. Oddfellows.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the Oddfellows Lodge, and it burned. And the Oddfellows, the brick was still there, but the center burned out. And the Oddfellows sold it, and then it was rebuilt. And I'll go through that later. I forgot. More Randalls. More Randalls. This is interesting. I love this. For the bed chamber, they had the chamber pot the rich people had those kinds of things. So they were the best off of any of the local people.
And their ranch is now the other side of the river by the golf course?
Their ranch was where the high school across the river is now. And this was Dixie's, her grandfather made this for Dixie when she was a girl in 1880.
Wow.
All handmade, everything there he made, all of the furniture, everything. He was quite a handyman. And people have said, that dollhouse has no significance in this museum. I said, come on, give me a break. It really was. This is all handmade. He made this stuff. Then they bought some ceramics, but all of the wood, everything, he handcrafted that. Her grandfather, back after he got too old to work.
So if I pick that table up, it don't say made in China?
No. Yeah. So, okay, these old photographs, we're in the process of cleaning those up, but they used to be a lot brighter. Well, like here, this is a picture of photograph of the interior of their building, and this is where they had, this one too. And this is, you can see these photographs, or these pictures, and in old 1880s photographs.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we will explore some of the buildings of Old Town Dayton and more of the historical artifacts of Dayton's illustrious past. Come see what we discover on our next episode of Rambling Passion. And thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and share if you enjoyed this video.